Asyncio loops, how to implement Asynio in an existing Python program, and share variables data. My application needs remote control over SSH. I wish to use this example, this URL. The original app is rather big, using GPIO and 600 lines of code, 10 libraries. So I've made a simple example here. The main app is mostly driven by a while true loop with lots of functions and sleep. I've commented that part out in the simple example above. My question is, how should I implement the SSH part that uses loop.run_forever and still be able to run my main loop? Also, the handle_client process must be able to interact with variables in the main program. Read, write.
You have basically three options. Rewrite your main loop to be asyncio compatible. A main while true loop with lots of sleeps is exactly the kind of code you want to write asynchronously. Convert this into this. This is the most work, but it is almost certain that your current code will be better written, clearer, easier to maintain and easier to develop if written as a bunch of coroutines. If you do this, the problem goes away. With cooperative multitasking you tell the code when to yield, so sharing state is generally pretty easy. By not awaiting anything in between getting and using a state for you prevent race conditions, no need for any kind of thread-safe var. Run your asyncio loop in a thread. Leave your current loop intact, but run your Asynio loop in a thread, or process, with either threading or multiprocessing. Expose some kind of thread-safe variable to allow the background thread to change state, or transition to a thread-safe messaging paradigm, where the SSH thread emits messages into a queue which your main loop handles in its own time. A message could be something like a5, which would be handled by doing something like state_dict msg 0 == msg 1 for everything in the queue. If you want to go this way, have a look at the multiprocessing and or threading docs for examples of the right ways to pass variables or messages between threads. Note that this version will likely be less performant than a pure asyncio solution, particularly if your code is mostly sleeping in the main loop anyhow. Run your synchronous code in a thread, and have asyncio in the foreground. As at Mr. Mayajai points out, asyncio has loop.run_in_executor for launching a process to run blocking code. It's more generally used to run the odd blocking bit of code without tying up the whole loop, but you can run your whole main loop in it. The same concerns about some kind of thread-safe variable or message sharing apply. This has the advantage, as at Mr. Mayajai points out, of keeping asyncio where it expects to be. I have a few projects which use background asyncio threads in generally non-asyncio code, event-driven GUI code with an asyncio thread interacting with custom hardware over USB. It can be done, but you do have to be careful as to how you write it. Note by the way that if you do decide to use multiple threads, message passing with a queue is usually easier than directly sharing variables.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.